Okay, let's unpack this. We're taking a deep dive into the history of a place described in your source material as the island of Aphrodite, or Venus.
That's right, Cyprus. And what your sources really highlight right from the start is its incredible location.
Yeah.
You know, right at the nexus of Europe, Asia, and Africa, it's the third largest island in the Med, geographically distinct, but also sitting just off the coasts of the Levant and Asia Minor.
And that unique position, plus that key resource, copper, really set the stage, didn't it, for its long, complex history, constantly attracting outside attention.
Absolutely.
You've given us quite a stack of material covering this whole journey, from the very first signs of human life right up to today's challenges.
And our mission here is really to go through this material together, pull out the most important bits, the key insights, and help you get a really clear picture of Cyprus's past without, getting totally overwhelmed.
Right, like a shortcut to being well-informed on this, well, pretty surprising story of this island.
Exactly.
So let's set the scene a bit more. Geography. The sources mention the mountains, the coastal plains, Kyrenia, Troodos, the Massaria Plain in the middle.
Yep, and that classic Mediterranean climate, dry summers, rain November to March, pretty standard stuff.
But it's that copper. The sources say it was being exploited way back, like prehistoric times.
That's key. That resource and the location made it valuable from the very, very beginning, long before written history.
Speaking of which, the earliest evidence we have from your sources is pretty limited, isn't it? Stone tools in caves near Paphos, maybe 20,000, 12,000 years ago?
Yeah, that's about it. Likely seasonal hunting spots, camping sites. The material's clear, though. We don't see significant cultural or societal development really kicking off in that Paleolithic period.
Okay.
It's when we move into the Neolithic and especially the early Bronze Age, so after 3900 BCE, that things really start to change.
Right. The sources describe larger settlements popping up, more complex social structures.
And crucial technological leaps, metallurgy, the potter's wheel, game changers.
And the material points out this rapid evolution around 3900, 3800 BCE. Pottery changes fast, more exotic obsidian turns up, fancy stone tools, ritual vessels.
It really suggests, increasing exchange with other places.
Which then sparks local innovations later in the Middle Bronze Age. Makes sense.
And this period also brings us to one of the most intriguing mysteries the sources touch on. The dawn of writing.
Ah, yes.
At the start of the late Bronze Age, a script appears. And the thing is, it's currently lost, undeciphered.
Wow. A distinctive syllabary found on tablets, seals, often in palatial contexts.
Exactly. The sources also mention cuneiform inscriptions, but mainly for commercial stuff. Trade records, taxes, official dealings.
To even pinpoint specific tablets. Someone called Apashando, linked to Assyrian dealings over copper.
That's the one. So writing seems to have been driven by managing resources and trade right from the get-go. The sources connect this early script to ones found in Crete, suggesting it was a phonetic syllabary, maybe related to Ugarit, perhaps derived from Aegean writing.
And a Cypriot syllabic script appears before the 12th century. But the main function stays commercial, preserving contracts and stuff.
That's what the material stresses, yeah.
Yeah.
Throughout antiquity.
Interesting how they highlight the adaptability, too. Later adjusted for Greek vowels, sounds, and the sort of globalization of Cypriot art style in the early Iron Age.
Absolutely. And speaking of connections, the sources talk about movements of people near the end of the Middle Bronze Age. They note similarities between Cypriot material culture then and Philistine cities on the Levant coast. It suggests a shared affiliation in the 13th century.
And alongside that, you've got Mycenaean imports Greek pottery showing up early 13th century Cyprus.
Right, although then it disappears for a century, which is odd.
Yeah. The sources also mention importing purple-dyed textiles from Minoan or Mycenaean areas earlier, 15th century, and even copying the amphorae they came in.
Plus Canaanite colonization in the late Bronze Age. That brought new architecture, different burial practices.
And the sources say this is where Cypriots adopted a pictographic script, the Cypro-Minoan script, originally from Canaan.
Yeah, using it to write their own language, which was apparently a spoken variant of Canaanite. It stayed in use right through the second millennium.
And cuneiform. The sources mention Cypriots serving abroad, Amuhas, using it for record-keeping in 707 BCE.
Confirms the administrative use, yeah. But the material notes it wasn't used for, religious or literary stuff.
So even way back then, you've got multiple scripts, multiple cultures interacting.
Exactly. That crossroads theme is there from the very start.
Okay, jumping forward a bit. Cyprus really enters the sort of wider written historical record around 800 BCE.
Incorporation into the Assyrian Empire. Sennacherib recorded it.
And ruled by Assyria, later Egypt, for periods. But the material emphasizes this was maybe more cultural than political, still in the Levant's orbit.
That's the argument, yeah. Culturally significant, perhaps more so than politically at that stage.
Then the Persians arrive, conquer the island around 5254 BCE after some independence. But what's interesting is the sources say Persian rule wasn't super strict.
That's a really key detail. It let many local states keep their rulers, and crucially, it meant revolts were, well, possible.
Right, like the anxiety mentioned when news of the Ionian revolt spread, partly encouraged by Athens.
Yeah, and Cyprus even managed a temporary break from Persia through an alliance with Egypt, though the sources hint this might have also hidden or worsened local social problems.
And the material makes a very clear point here. Cyprus was never directly part of the Greek political world in this classical period.
No.
Athens explicitly gave up its claims in the king's peace, acknowledging Persian sovereignty.
A critical distinction the sources really hammer home: cultural influence versus political control.
The whole scene shifts massively after Alexander the Great dies in 323 BC. Suddenly, Cyprus is this vital strategic piece, a pawn.
Caught right between Ptolemy in Egypt and Antigonus in Asia Minor.
Antigonus got control first, 317 BC, and the sources sound pretty grim about it. Mass extermination, tyranny without assembly, this oppressive Spartan general Nicias.
Yeah, not a happy period. Relief came from the Egyptian Ptolemies. Nicias was beaten, Cyprus fell to Ptolemy Soter in 305 BC.
Ushering in a new era. Mass immigration of Greek colonists, mixed Helleno-Cypriot cities re-established around places like Salamis, Paphos.
The early Ptolemaic period, especially under Ptolemy Philadelphus, is described as pretty peaceful and prosperous. Even if copper trade maybe declined, they adapted. Moved the capital to Paphos, enriched the Aphrodite sanctuary, built harbors, consciously built ties with Egypt.
The sources mention that gift, the statue of heavenly Aphrodite to Queen Berenice, symbolizing the bond.
Right. But that progress stalled. Around 168 BC, Greece attacks Ptolemaic rule, and the sources mention ecological imbalance, societal decline on the island following that.
And then, Rome. The sources say appropriated in 598 BC, formerly a Roman province 22 BCE after Actium.
And local authorities apparently rewarded Octavian's win with Cypriot copper. Maybe a smart move.
The material highlights its economic value to Rome. Wealth, industry, that intricate copper work on coins praised back in Italy.
They also mention new techniques, the Scuros method, improving Phoenician metal casting, Roman efficiency, perhaps.
The late Roman period shows changing burial customs in the archaeology, though the sources call it a bit cryptic.
Yeah, harder to read.
And we get glimpses of social tension through people like Julian criticizing Christians. No schools, hospitals, workhouses. And he seemed to think Cypriots were a bit naive.
Seems that way. And the cultural clashes are clear, stigmatizing actors, banning theater, Christians pushing back against sun god festivals, temple prostitution.
Yeah, and those fascinating local beliefs mentioned the virgin priestess, the goddess is mother of gods, banishing salt from the altar, maybe against pirates. A real mix of old and new.
It's that constant interplay, isn't it? Local customs meeting incoming forces defines so much of Cyprus's history.
And that crossroads idea is definitely prominent in the Byzantine era, which kicks off around 292-295 AD.
The sources really drive that home, saying Cyprus combined characteristics from Palestine, Egypt, Anatolia, Greece, Sicily, Italy, all converging there.
Astride trade routes, a meeting place for people, ideas, cultures.
But even as part of the huge Byzantine Empire, its political story was, as the sources put it, rumpled. Constant invasions, occupations, newcomers, resources always seemed to be changing hands.
Yet through all that, the majority Greek-speaking population kept undergoing Hellenization.
And there's evidence of prosperity from shipwrecks, amphoras, stone anchors, still a key trade node.
What struck me from the materials is how, despite the stunning visual evidence like churches and mosaics that survive, the actual archaeological info for this long Byzantine period seems sparse compared to earlier times.
That's a great point. The sources seem to lean more on written records, hagiographies, local historians like Georgios Grammakos.
They even point to specific buildings, like that church Agios Narcissos from 1451, with murals showing Byzantine Cypriot marriage customs. And this is, of course, when Christianity really digs in. The sources trace it right back to the apostles Paul and Barnabas sailing from Antioch, preaching in Salamis.
And that story in Paphos, Paul striking down Elymas, the proconsul converting, Quite dramatic.
The second journey saw a friendly reception in Paphos, though later the proconsul used civil law against Jews, and the sources track Christianity spreading Zambia, Akama, Soli. Galatians mentions churches of Cyprus.
It seemed to flourish, even through challenges. Internal church disputes, defeating monophysites, appointing archimandrites.
And those beautiful churches built, often with miraculous legends, even surviving the Arab conquest, St. Mamas, St. Neophytos, St. Tychon.
But the Arab presence wasn't just coexistence. The sources detail these devastating Arab raids in the second half of the 7th century.
Yeah, immense destruction mentioned. Deaths, captivity, churches and monasteries burned.
An invasion in 655-656 was repelled by Emperor Constans II, but the island did fall under Arab control for about 30 years, roughly 670 to 700.
Interestingly, though, during that time, the Cypriot Church kept good relations with Byzantium, not under Alexandria.
Right. And revenues still flowed to the imperial treasury. But the sources note Christians felt oppressed by Islamic tax laws and, well, the fundamental faith differences. Disillusionment set in.
Byzantium started trying to get it back in 688, launching raids from Cyprus. Justinian II's land invasion failed.
But a later attempt worked. His marriage apparently opened a political window. Clergy were recalled, St. Barnabas Church rebuilt.
And crucially, this period of restoration saw the formal establishment of a Cypriot archbishopric, commissioned by Justinian II.
Yes, and the document for that stayed on the island, later becoming a basis for Latin hierarchy claims.
Which perfectly sets up the Crusader period, starting 1191. Richard the Lionheart takes the island from the Byzantine Cypriots during the Third Crusade.
And his actions immediately changed everything, sold it to Guy de Lusignan, leading to the Latin Crusader Kingdom of Cyprus, a whole new state in the East Med.
Becoming this key hub, a western outpost for crusaders, nobles, merchants, pilgrims heading to the Holy Land.
The kings of Cyprus even inherited titles from the Old Kingdom of Jerusalem.
Sources mention political maneuvering, Hugh V's marriage, Peter II getting property, but also later instability. Henry II dethroned in 1463, James of Lusignan taking over.
Which complicated things with Venice, yeah. Fear of the Ottomans, Venetians were even consulted on appointing the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem.
It's interesting how the sources present Richard's legacy, portrayed positively, wise ruler bringing peace.
But then immediately say his first governor was cruel and greedy, causing real discontent.
Leading to exploitation, especially by Templars and Raymond of Tripoli. Taxes got so bad people wished for death, apparently complaining directly to Raymond.
Yeah, and complex legal fights involving figures like Countess Alesia. The sources highlight how the Crusaders just applied their own laws, a real sense of foreign rule.
Not a simple picture of peace at all.
No.
This complex situation then shifts dramatically again with the Ottoman conquest, Sultan Selim II after the Battle of Lepanto.
Ottoman troops invade June 1570. Nicosia falls after a long siege, July 25th. Famagusta holds out nearly 10 months, falls August 1st, 1571.
And tragically, the sources note most citizens of Famagusta were massacred later.
Grim stuff. The peace treaty in March 1573 makes Cyprus officially Ottoman. Venice pays up. Beginning of over 3 centuries of Ottoman rule, 1571 to 1878.
Now, here's a fascinating point the sources make. During this long period, no overt Ottoman-Greek conflict on the island itself.
Yeah, that's quite something. The Ottoman administration took a different tack than the Franks.
Abolished feudalism, set up courts, and crucially recognized the Greek Orthodox Church as self-governing.
The Millet Irumi.
The sources call it a golden age for the Greek Orthodox Church, a degree of self-government.
While some cathedrals became mosques, St. Paul's in Nicosia, St. Sophia in Famagusta, the sources argue this didn't scatter the Greek population or fundamentally change the Greekness of areas like Old Famagusta.
Interesting argument. And a significant Turkish element gets established. About 30,000 settlers from the mainland after 1571.
But the sources also note that over the centuries, these Turkish settlers picked up many local characteristics. Some blending occurred.
So the material paints a picture of relative peace, distinct communities coexisting, with the Greek Orthodox Church having significant autonomy.
Until
the rise of nationalism in the late 19th century. This is when that idea, Cyprus belongs exclusively to the Greeks, really starts gaining steam.
And the sources tackle this head-on. They fully acknowledge the deep historical roots of Greek culture, language, folklore, traditions going back ages.
And this is presented as a core argument from your sources. This heritage does not, in their view, mean the island was uniquely Greek or belonged only to Greeks.
No, they push back hard. They argue Cyprus belongs to all its inhabitants, Greeks and Turks, who share a common culture, heritage, history on the island.
Using that powerful analogy to say Cyprus is a Greek piece of land is like saying the pyramids belong to the Turks.
Yeah, it's a direct challenge to equating historical influence with exclusive ownership now.
The material also briefly touches on broader cultural changes under Ottoman rule. Cyprus moving away from intense Levantine isolation, developing its own character more.
Offering different explanations, social changes, new elites adopting Anatolian ways, communication shifts, or just Anatolian migration itself. Some argue it developed alone, others see constant outside influence.
Right, that tension again.
And speaking of external influence, next up, the British. Administrative control transferred via the Anglo-Ottoman Convention of 1878.
Though technically still Ottoman until Britain formally annexed it in 1914, right? Then Crown Colony in 1925. Brits were running things in the 1890s.
Pretty much. And the British period brought massive modernization, transport, communication, British law, admin, education, health, farming techniques, police forces.
The sources even break it down. Early period, admin, surveys, did intensive improvement period, WWII, new buildings, trade, then WWII, unproductive, poverty, housing issues.
And those issues, housing, education, ethnic tensions, really boiled over in the late period. Sources link this partly to Cypriots demanding peace and freedom around 1931 and British influence waning. That 1947 preliminary planning report shows they were aware.
And this is where Enosis' union with Greece becomes a major political force among Greek Cypriots and the church.
Though the sources mention an earlier potential moment in 1821 during the Greek expedition to Egypt, where the church showed energy for revolt, but the Ottomans quashed it quickly.
But the desire persisted. Venizelos' policy for union failed in the late 40s, early 50s.
Leading to a feeling, apparently, that a more aggressive approach was needed.
The philosophical text mentioned, questioning the island's destiny, British or Greek, which led to that secret committee in 1951, EOK.
Founded by General George Grivas, mission, liberate from foreign rule, unite with Greece via armed struggle.
Sources note his announcements included Bulgarian and Turkish Cypriots, claiming to fight for their dignity too.
That's what the material says, yeah. Influenced by the Algerian movement, apparently. Opted for armed struggle, code of conduct, simultaneous attacks. Conflict with the British seemed inevitable.
While that was happening, there were negotiation attempts too. That Dutch PM proposal in 1956, given to Makarios.
Required agreement from both sides. Grivas apparently saw it as a good opportunity.
And Makarios endorsed it, seeing it as a win for negotiation, maybe fearing the alternative.
Seems likely, based on the sources. They even mention the Amsterdam group involved.
Which brings us, after that long struggle, including EOK, to 1960.
Independence. August 1960. Cyprus becomes an independent republic, founding UN member August 16th.
And the sources really stress the foundation. The 1960 Constitution, bicommunal state, presidential system, ratified by both Greek and Turkish Cypriot leaders.
They frame independence as this moment of, toasting multiculturalism, compromise, coexistence.
Britain steps back from defense, foreign affairs, National Guard established, meant for both Greek and Turkish Cypriots. The system designed with blocking minorities for each community and government. Shared power was the idea.
President Makarios initially tried to be president for everyone, working with Turkish Cypriot leader Kukuk. Key institutions set up quickly with UK help.
Kukuk agreed to a Turkish Cypriot police chief, legislation streamlined admin.
But the material also says, despite setting up these distinct but complementary structures, they failed to build a truly unitary state. Greek and Turkish became official languages. There were conflicts with the remaining Brits, efforts to overhaul laws.
And sadly, the sources state, despite the 1960 Constitution's guarantees, intercommunal tensions just escalated quickly into civil conflict. Foreign intervention followed.
The Republic's multi-ethnic setup basically challenged its legitimacy from day one. Both Greeks and Turks struggled to build national identities, increasingly looking towards ethnocentric states, not a shared Cypriot one.
This simmering tension tragically boiled over in 1974. The coup, orchestrated by the Greek military junta in Athens July 15th, overthrew Makarios. Violent period began.
The material even mentions an earthquake around that time, 4.1, 4.8 magnitude, complicating any negotiation efforts, just another layer of chaos.
And then the Turkish army invaded. July 20th, 1974. Sources state the justification was rescuing Turkish Cypriots.
But argue the underlying intent was partition, incorporating the North.
The invasion ended August 11th. Greek capitulation, North occupied. And those ceasefire lines, as the sources state, are still there.
Still there today.
And here's where your sources really dive into the fundamental difference in how 1974 is seen.
Absolutely crucial point from the material. It lays out the Greek Cypriot view. The invasion directly caused partition and forced displacement of over 250,000 Greek Cypriots. They see the first phase, July 20, accompanied by ethnic cleansing of Turkish Cypriots by Greek forces in Greek areas, and the second phase, August 14th, causing greater displacement and occupying roughly 37% of the island.
Okay. And then the contrasting Turkish Cypriot view.
Hails it as a peace operation, something to be celebrated, a necessary response to the Greek junta's coup, aimed, in their narrative, at restoring the status quo violated by the Greek Cypriot side and removing the reasons for the coup.
The sources explicitly say neither side seems willing to fully acknowledge the other's narrative.
Right. And while the events described might not factually contradict, there's what the material calls an irreconcilable fallacy over the meaning, the justification of 1974.
So the consequences of this division. Turkey occupies the north. Sources estimate about 80,000 colonists brought in.
Yes. Turkish Cypriots declared the Turkish Federated State of Cyprus in 75. Then the pseudo, as the sources call it, Republic of Northern Cyprus, TRNC, in November 83, recognized only by Turkey.
And according to your material, since 74, that 1960 constitution is basically suspended. The joint entity ceased to function.
While the international community, UN members, continue to recognize only the Republic of Cyprus established in 1960.
Sources also mention a post-74 rewritten constitution by the Greek Cypriot side, not in use, but defines a unitary government.
And critically, disregards rights granted to Turkish Cypriots in 1960, which, from the Turkish Cypriot view, makes a bicommunal solution based on equality impossible.
So the material's clear. Turkish Cypriots don't see the 1960 constitution as a valid starting point now?
No.
The sources also detail actions described as systematic deprivation of Turkish Cypriot rights language, education, representation, minimizing mingling, replacing signs, campaigns to deprive them of goods.
Even mentioning acts of hatred towards Turkish inscriptions, monuments, and leaders stirring hostility.
Reconciliation attempts have faced huge hurdles. Sources describe reluctance from all parties since 74 Greek Cypriots, Turkish Cypriots, Turkey, UN, to create a unified Cyprus based on shared understanding.
UN talks ongoing since 84, but little progress noted, increasingly called a frozen conflict.
The UN talks ongoing since 84, but little progress noted, increasingly called a frozen conflict.
The material does mention a more recent trend, growing unprecedented acceptance of the Turkish Cypriot side in world opinion, especially led by the EU.
Putting pressure on Turkey, perhaps.
Potentially. But the sources highlight the difficulty for the EU and Turkey's firm stance. Copenhagen criteria non-negotiable, no unilateral steps south without bold moves north, like lifting embargoes.
So based on the sources, significant progress towards reunification seems unlikely without a major shift from Turkey, given past frustrations.
Seems to be the assessment.
Shifting gears to modern Cyprus, Republic of Cyprus. Your sources describe it as developed, successful, high standard of living.
Yes, citing steady average GDP growth, 4.5% since 74, strong growth in the 90s, fueled by tourism, foreign investment, Greek, British, Russian sources mention.
Joined the Eurozone mid-2008, but then got hit hard by the Eurozone crisis from 2010. Banking losses from Greek bonds, credit downgrades, eventually needing Troika help.
The sources list the strengths, geography, UK-Greece ties, bridge potential, but also weaknesses, dependence on tourism shipping, external deficit, structural issues, regulation, corruption reports.
These vulnerabilities led to speculation, fears of insolvency early 2013, and that crisis in March 2013. The sources describe it starkly. Bank closure Saturday, direct bank bail-in Tuesday.
Called a drastic restructuring almost overnight, the greatest monetary shock. Tighter living conditions followed. That financial services sector, the mini Nassau, diminished significantly.
They briefly mention the banking system, Domestic International, its rapid expansion pre-crisis based on foreign funds.
But despite that shock, services remain vital. Expertise in shipping, banking, tourism. Still seen as a front office location for international clients, geography, low tax, EU membership, ECB regulation help, though investment slowed after EU restrictions.
Tourism development is a big theme. Traced back to 19th century travel books promoting biblical sites, making it an obligatory stop.
Today, positioned as upmarket, friendly, high-quality service, the CTO mentioned managing growth, aiming for right kind of people with money, maintaining standards.
Big contributor to living standards, income, infrastructure. And the sources highlight unique local customs. Limassol Wine Festival harvests, Paphos egg painting, Suvla, like an Ismata dance, weddings, shared meals.
Adds to the appeal, yeah.
And EU membership. Now, the source says since 1961. We know the widely cited date is 2004, but sticking strictly to your material.
It says 1961, okay. Regardless of the date in the source, it's clearly viewed as hugely significant.
Stresses strategic importance. Europe, East Med, Arab world. Commitment to EU ideals, rule of law, human rights, democracy.
Its unique position seen as an EU asset identifying threats, stability, role in energy, migration, foreign affairs. Policy of constructive engagement with neighbors based on international law noted.
Although the sources feel its position and policy are still less acknowledged or understood.
Seems so.
Bringing us right to today. Sources state clearly. Modern Cyprus is divided, apparently not in the process of becoming reunited. Separation mainly ethnic.
Described as a battleground between Greek and Turkish groups. Strong nationalistic feelings towards Athens and Ankara, respectively. Sources argue social educational institutions used to train people in line with motherland ideas.
The human cost mentioned tragic. Hundreds dead, thousands refugees. Reunification efforts stalled despite UN, US, EU attempts, 4 unsuccessful major peace plans cited.
EU accession did provide some security for the Republic of Cyprus. Its position at the confluence of NATO-EU spheres, rivalries, energy routes keeps it significant, relevant for border control, migration, terrorism cooperation, like during the Arab Spring.
But political divisions, land disputes led to deep distrust. Sources make that poignant point. Foreignness became synonymous with power. Politics replaced understanding commonality, trapping behavior in cycles of anger, hatred, repression.
Grim assessment. Yet, despite the division, EU membership also seen as offering Greek Cypriots, with their long European identity, a chance to join Europe, acknowledge boundaries, languages, gain a renewed vision.
The reunification dream persists, but the standoff continues. Greek Cypriot refusal to lift embargoes without concessions impacting Turkey-EU relations.
And while growing international acceptance of the Turkish Cypriot side might pressure Turkey, the sources conclude substantial achievement is unlikely without a change in Turkish posture given past frustrations.
So we've really peeled back the layers here, haven't we? From the first stone tools through empires, unity, division, booms, crises, right up to this complex standoff.
It's a history shaped so much by geography, resources, and just waves of external powers, culminating in this divided state despite those deep historical roots and, aspirations for peace.
And it brings us back to that fundamental question the sources raised near the end. Was Cyprus historically Greek?
Right.
We've seen the evidence presented for Greek-influenced language, script, history, Aphrodite. But the sources also counter that the island was invaded, transferred between rulers countless times, often without asking the locals, long before any major Hellenistic invaders.
The source text itself uses that sensu analogy in concluding pulling down the enemy's towers before battle, applying it to dismantling the towers of historical claims and rhetoric to get to the real issue.
So, given this incredibly long, layered history of external control, competing influences, these starkly different narratives of belonging, here's a thought drawn from the spirit of this material for you to consider. Is the core question about Cyprus truly about who it historically belonged to centuries or millennia ago? Or is it fundamentally about the rights and the shared future of all the people who inhabit it today, regardless of their specific historical ties or ethnic background?
Something to definitely keep in mind as you reflect on everything we've discussed in this deep dive.
That is all the time we have for this deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing these sources and letting us explore the remarkable and, challenging history of Cyprus with you.
And remember, this deep dive is really just the beginning. We absolutely encourage you to keep exploring the parts of this story that sparked your interest the most.
Until the next deep dive.